We prayed with our feet. And before I begin, I'll start with a couple quotes. The first quote is by Frederick Douglass. Praying for freedom never did me any good till I started praying with my feet. The second quote is by Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel upon returning from the march from Selma to Montgomery in 1965. I felt my legs were praying. We prayed with our feet on that day, linking arms, clasping hands, marching forwards, as unflagging dreams lit the way to a distant prismatic future where smiles are smiles no matter the color. We prayed with our feet on that day, as harsh sunlight blinded our eyes and billy clubs struck gasping faces, as unflagging dreams lit the way. This is an unlawful assembly. You have to disperse. Mr. Major, can we have a word? We prayed with our feet on that day. I've got nothing further to say. So we stood our ground, heartbeats quickening, as unflagging dreams lit the way, and tears and blood splattered our vision, and cracking whips shattered our ears. We prayed with our feet on that day, as unflagging dreams lit the way. Thank you.
Thank you, Hannah Rubin. That was absolutely beautiful. Hannah entered her poem in a contest sponsored by the Racial Unity Team in Exeter, and is one of 3 poets selected to read at the opening of these 3 events. Welcome to our 2nd annual poetry event, Black Matter is Life, Poetry for Engagement and Overcoming. Before we begin, I'd like to turn to our office manager, Gina Bowker, who has a couple of housekeeping notes.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Just a couple of housekeeping things real quick. We ask that you please keep your mics muted during this program until the audience participation portion at the end. If you have any IT problems, you can put it in the chat, prefaced by the letters IT. If you have any questions for the moderators before the Q&A period, please put that in the chat, prefaced by the letters QA. And please feel free to dialogue using the chat with the other participants here. We love for people to be able to talk to each other. And with that, I'm going to go back to Mimi.
Thank you. We are proud to partner with 3S Art Space to present this poetry series in tandem with 2 unique exhibits. We'd like to thank our sponsor, Revision Energy. Black Matter is Life obviously plays off of Black Lives Matter. Dr. Wilburn came up with this title last year, a title intended to evoke thoughts concerning what is Black Matter and what does it mean for Black Matter to be life. This 3-part program is designed to build bridges across the racial divide by introducing you to well-known and little-known Black poets and to the rich diversity within African-American poetic tradition. We ask that you consider how African-American poetry provides tools for healing our nation's deep racial wounds, and to explore the question, why does African-American poetry matter? Our hosts for this evening, Dr. Reginald Wilburn, Associate Professor of English at UNH, specializing in African-American literature and culture, and Courtney Marshall, English teacher at PEA, with classes rooted in Black feminist teachers, in conversation with our multi-talented guest poet, Kyle Flemings, whom they will introduce. Our hosts will engage you in deconstructing 4 poems grouped by the theme, the race for STEM. They will introduce each poem and guide you in spirited conversation about the selected poems and their relevance to the theme. Links to these poems are in the chat. We hope that you will leave this program with a new appreciation for how African-American poetry can shed light on our understanding of our nation's past and present, and on how we might imagine our nation's future. Thank you and welcome.
All right, there we go. Give me a second to find the button. You know
Hey,
how to-
Courtney, how are you?
I'm all right. How are you doing?
All righty. It seems like it was just 4 weeks ago when I saw you last.
I think it was. You're right. You're right. Hey, Dennis. I'm on. Dr. Britton. All right. So I guess I always want to say, first, thank you all for coming out and spending part of your evening with us. And I would be, a Black feminist gone wrong if I did not acknowledge the passing of Bell Hooks today. Very important Black feminist thinker who in her memoir, Bone Black, wrote, "It is poetry that changes everything." And so I'm taking that spirit into our discussion tonight, thinking about what is it that poetry changes. Right. So I'm really excited to be here with everybody tonight.
Well, do you have any thoughts on that provocative statement and question?
Wow. Well, it makes me think of this quote that I have by James Baldwin that's hanging up in my classroom. So I'm, as it was said, I'm an English teacher, and I'll paraphrase really poorly because it's behind me in my classroom, but it says it's about how you think that your heartbreak is so, like, you're the only one who's ever felt these feelings. And he says, and then you read and you learn that the things that hurt you and that bothered you have bothered tons of other people. And so that's what that quote makes me think of, that it's the encountering poetry, which I'm so in awe of poets, and because they're trying to use these words to try and get something across to us, to non-poets. So I'm always grateful to them for talking to us. But yeah, there's something about that act of engaging with someone else's feelings, and also their attempts to give voice to something that's happening that changes us as well. And so that's what those two quotes make me think of.
If I could take a stab at that very same question, I think that quote and the sentiments of the quote, as I understand it, I think there's something very special about poets invite, if not compel us to think about matter that we take for granted, right? I think how they choke with language, the metaphors they use, the similes they construct, the personas they create, the economy of language and yet the complexity of it at the same time. I think it invites us into a world to reconsider all that we thought we knew, right? If we think 2 + 2 is 4, do we really know it? And I think a poem can invite us and compel us to rethink the premises that lead us to believe and assume that 2 + 2 is 4. And of course, I'm using a mathematical equation, but it could be for any phenomenon in culture, those things that we just think that we've moved beyond and we know so well. I think poets ask us to take a second look. And in that second look, we see ourselves anew, the world that we think that we inhabit, that we know, we see that anew. And if we're willing, it forces us to change.
Yes, yes. They do. Amen. We preaching early today.
How about that? All I need is Dennis to pull out his Hammond B3 organ. I think we could have a hallelujah time. But so we're coming today to talk about the race for STEM. And I think that title really resonates with me as in some of my administrative leadership work in the past and what I'm getting ready to embark on in the future. The challenges that I am aware of that STEM fields and many practitioners in STEM fields are engaged with, are confronting with how to make DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, right, a signature foregrounded component in the work that they do in STEM disciplines, i.e. science, technology, engineering, and math. And I'm wondering, is there a way that poetry, and certainly the poems selected and curated for today, provide a portal for thinking about expanding the work that poets do in the humanities, beyond the humanities, into these realms where it's not likely our students expect to discuss race, gender, sexuality, class, physical ability, any of the isms that challenge equality. And so I think I'm really excited to discuss with you these poems, and then certainly the poem of our resident, a guest for today, who's a former UNH Wildcat, or is a UNH Wildcat, who's prolific in his own right and has sort of brought us some poems for consumption. So I don't know, maybe should we just get started by maybe reading a couple of the poems that resonate with us for
You want to
today?
start? How about you start?
Oh, okay. Oh, you're gonna pull an okie doke on me. Sure. Well, I am really excited about James Monroe Whitfield's poem. He's a poet from the 19th century that I'm really excited about. Kind of obscure, but yet prolific, it turns out. He was actually born in Exeter, New Hampshire. So before moving to Rochester, New York, and ultimately ending up in San Francisco, California. He was also a barber, published his own collection of poems. It was sort of like a moonlighting job, and sort of got the attention, gained the attention and notoriety of Frederick Douglass. And so if I can find my poem right quick, I'll be happy to read. And it reads, so this is Yes, Strike That Sounding String by James Monroe Whitfield. Yes, strike again that sounding string and let the wildest numbers roll. Thy song of fiercest passion sing, it breathes responsive to my soul. A soul whose gentlest hours were nursed in stern adversity's dark way, and o'er whose pathway never burst one gleam of hope's enlivening ray. If thou wouldest soothe my burning brain, sing not to me of joy and gladness. 'Twill but increase the raging pain and turn the fever into madness. Sing not to me of landscapes bright, of fragrant flowers and fruitful trees, of azure skies and mellow light, or whisperings of the gentle breeze. But tell me of the tempest roaring across the angry foaming deep, or torrents from the mountainous pouring down precipices dark and steep. Sing of the lightning's lurid flash, the ocean's roar, the howling storm, the earthquake's shock, the thunder's crash, where ghastly terrors teeming swarm. Sing of the battle's deadly strife, the ruthless march of war and pillage, the awful waste of human life, the plundered town, the burning village, of streets with human gore made red, of priests upon the altar slain, the scenes of rapine, woe, and dread that fill the warrior's horrid train. Thy song may then an echo wake deep in this soul long crushed and sad, the direful impressions shake, which threaten now to drive it mad. And I don't know, I guess if we wanted to discourse on that a little bit before you read your poem. I think what I love about that poem is thinking about math or music as a type of mathematical instrument. I talk a lot in my courses about the trivium and the quadrivium, which combine, those are the 7 units that make up what we call the liberal arts. And so in the trivium, which is considered the first scaffold of learning, it consists of grammar, rhetoric, and logic. And then the quadrivium, which is considered, once you've mastered the trivium, then you escalate into the quadrivium. And this is how the university system is built in terms of the curriculum and learning. The quadrivium consists of physics, geometry, mathematics, and music. And what I love exploring and explaining to students is, why is music this seemingly creative fine art? Why is it combined or engaged in the quadrivium with math and the sciences. And that's because in medieval times and coming into the early modern period, right, math was considered a science in time and space, right? And so if you think about the science of making notes fit into a measure, right? Or if you think about the science of composing or choreographing a dance in sync with music, that requires a scientific intelligence, even as it's a creative one, right? And so what I love about this particular poem, it is using music and the cacophony of nature, the tempest roaring, the lurid flashes of lightning, right? It's using that to get at a sentiment of the wearied soul amid slavery, racism, and injustice. Whitfield is writing during the time of, just before the Civil War. And so how music then becomes a lyrical instrument, a poetic instrument to express the anxieties, the frustrations, the woes of being Black and deemed unequal, right? And what I think is interesting about this poem, it's not the soft refrains of nature, it's not the lulling refrains of nature that he's adamantly asking us to play, but it's that type of cacophony of music that echoes the tempest, the torrents of the sea, right? The lurid lightning flashes, right? It's that type of music, nature's music, that demands an activism, right? That can best express the sentiments of those who are subjected under racial tyranny.
Mm. Mm. I guess I'm looking back at the stanza. Let's see, it's the fourth stanza. I think this, goes to what you were saying, where it says, "Sing not to me of landscapes bright." So again, thinking about what image of nature comes across in this poem, that to have, to go up, if thou would soothe my burning brain, sing not to me of joy and gladness. So to think that this isn't a poem, as it says, of fragrant flowers and fruitful trees, but it says, tell me, as you said, tell me of the tempest roaring. And so there's just there's all this water. I've been thinking a lot about water recently, because I picked up the picture book Born on the Water, and just kind of thinking about kind of what Black poets might be doing with water, that water is this, of course, a nurturing, quenching substance, and I guess with matter it being liquid, but it can also be destructive, right? It can be fast, it can be powerful, at the same time that it can also, it can come down in torrents, right? But it can also kind of come down in very light droplets.
Yes.
Yeah, so that also struck me about this poem. Now, have you been a fan of James Monroe Whitfield?
Yes, actually, because I have some articles that I wish to write on him that relate him to Milton. So he also sort of chokes with Milton in a few of his anti-slavery poems. So for those who don't know, I'm a Milton scholar, and I'm invested in how African-American writers sample Milton and why they do. So yes, that is like a project on the near horizon. We have projects on top of projects, but that is my interest in Whitfield. But I think the fact that I discovered him and recognized he was from Exeter, and then I end up at UNH, that has always fascinated me. And he's just one of those Black poets that not too many know, and that he was pretty much self-taught, right? And he had to, it reminds me of Alice Walker's In Search of Our Mother's Gardens, right? The double time work, right? That scholars or organic intellectuals needed to do in order to be poetic, right? In order to be creators of artistic content, right? And although he wasn't a slave, right? But the fact that he had to work as a barber by day and then find hours by night to create poems speaks to another situatedness of being Black and social inequality of his time. And to produce poetry that is as intrinsically complex and yet publicly accessible, I think is a phenomenon of Black intelligence that asks us to think a little more deeply about race, for STEM and what is being accomplished with this poem as a STEM concern or a STEM conceit, thinking about music as a science, as a creative science.
Mm. It also makes you think of the good work of Renee Allen, who's really trying to get us learning more. I always like to do plugs for good things that are coming with our, Exeter Lit Fest and really celebrating Whitfield. So I'm really excited as she and others like get us learning more about this poet from Exeter. That's really exciting too. Oh wait, there was there's a note to IT. Speaking of technology and poetry. There's always.
And then I like the ending stanza, right? So you take us through, the persona of the poem, gives us this admonition, yes, strike again that sounding string, right? So that musical refrain is the times need this music so badly that that string must be sounded again, right? And then sort of takes us through the soul whose gentlest hours were nursed in stern adversity's dark way, right? So this is an individual who was nursed in the gentle strains of racial adversity, right? And so what kind of music in the midst of the 1850s could sing the song of being abject and Black, right? And so if thou wouldest soothe my burning brain, don't sing this madness, don't try to quell my madness with the song strains, because that's not going to do it, right? The racial adversity of the times, I need a more riotous music, right? And of course, in the 20th and the 21st century context, right, I'm thinking about hip hop, right, as that radical response, right? The radical rebellious refrain, right? That's stridently in your face, that's stridently condemning injustice, right? And so we have this sort of petition, right, for a music that can do what hip hop does, right? That's riotous and that's bombastic. And that somehow that type of music as synonymous with the inner feelings, right? If we can't act out, we can listen, right? And so that maybe this music can do that. And so it takes us through the music of pillage and strife, and this awful waste of human life, the burning village. So this is the pestilence of revelations, if you will, right? And so we get to this final stanza, thy song, then will that song an echo wake, right? Deep in this soul, long crushed and sad, I feel there's a resignation, right, of the Black abject being who has no other recourse but the music to find inspiration to get up and move forward the next day. That the direful impressions will shake, which threaten now to drive it mad. The persona is maddened and needs a riotous music to emancipate himself from going crazy, right? And so what then is the value of music as a science to heal the racial ills of someone who's on the verge of being maddened?
Right, and also to go back to that line of soothe my burning brain, also like what is the role of music in changing the persona's physical state as well, to have a bodily change, and to because I think, today we would say, oh yes, like music calms us down, like listening to music, it does change us bodily, either lowering our blood pressure or making us breathe or something like that. And so it's also interesting for me to think about that too. And then to go farther, like what is the kind of bodily impact of this poem on the person reading it? So, go ahead. And you saying he was an MC. Why? That's all good.
Right.
MC
and I guess I've always been fascinated, like what is the science for arranging notes and tempo and measures and ad libs? What is the science for getting us to feel, right? If we come to music in different emotional dispensations in need of some catharsis, what is the intellectual genius of those artists and musicians who can arrange notes in such a way, right? I'm thinking about Ntozake Shange's, right? The opening for colored girls who considered suicide when the rainbow was enough. scattered half notes of never having been a girl, right? What is the mathematical science for arranging notes, for scattering notes on a sheet, right? That are coded symbols for words that are accompanied by words to produce emancipatory or cathartic feeling. And what kind of purchase could we get out of science matched with the creativity of art in STEM courses that ask students to do that kind of work within a racial context? Of course, these are questions far beyond our ability to answer them necessarily in the moment, but I think that they're worth us thinking about if we're trying to emancipate the curriculum, the STEM curriculum, right, of its sort of white tyrannical hold, if you will, right? If it is resistant to bringing in DEI, I think there's something that Black musicians and poets are offering us to consider about the race for STEM.
It also, just hearing you talk, I'm teaching a class on the Harlem Renaissance, and so tomorrow we're reading, I didn't ask the students to read, Sterling Brown's Ma Rainey poem. Yes. And I'm looking at the last, and he's, in this poem, he's talking about the effect that Ma Rainey has on the audience. And he says, they bow their heads and cry. And then the last two lines, there wasn't much more the fellow say, she just gets hold of us that way. So again, thinking about like, what is that kind of physical reaction to hearing her voice, hearing her songs. And again, like a place where, in my mind, I'm thinking about science and art coming together. Yeah. Just something.
Would you like to read your poem? Does this?
Sure.
We could certainly talk about this for hours on end.
So I'll switch over to Eve Ewing, which was fun. So some people heard me start reading and talking about this on NHPR. I really dig this poem. I came across this poem last April I might have said this at the last gathering, during National Poetry Month. On my Instagram, I wanted to highlight a Black woman poet every single day because I was trying to demonstrate that you can go through 30, 50, 100 days and you will never repeat a Black woman. And so that's really important to me to show and just to expose folks to lots of poets. So I started reading this. So now you'll get to hear how it ends. All right, so let's go back to this. All right, so this is horror movie pitch. I'm also a huge fan of horror movies, so this was also fun, a fun poem for me to think about. Yeah. All right. So horror movie pitch by Eve Ewing. Okay, I'm laughing already. You guys are gonna love it. Get this. All the Black women turn invisible. All of them, just overnight. America goes to sleep and they're there, and then they wake up and they're not. The scary part, stick with me, they're not gone. You just can't see them. Yeah, look around, right? Think about it. They can see each other, but you can't see them, and they could be anywhere. The girl you passed up for the promotion, she could be in your car, ready to yank your head back by your hair right when you're at a busy intersection. The woman you grabbed on the subway escalator, she could be in your living room looking through your tax returns. The group of friends you whistled at might take turns whistling back at you from hidden places, shrill and off key until you go mad. The one you prodded and whispered about, she might be lurking in the men's room with a sharp letter opener and a roll of duct tape. The girl you lied on again and again might be on the back porch where you smoke, and she's dousing your cigarettes in lighter fluid. All the ones whose hair you touched, all the ones whose names you mocked, all the ones whose pay you cut, the one whose houses, the ones whose jobs, the ones whose babies, the ones. They could be anywhere with knives or guns, poison or machetes, or things they have to say to you about you, and you have to listen. I mean, let's be real. Maybe they would just leave. I'd leave. Go somewhere warm and secret, string up Christmas lights, raise goats and chickens, grow zucchini and fire up the grill, make every night for cards and barbecue, let their hair grow or cut it all off, let themselves get fat or skinny, talk about things that are not you. But then again, maybe they would do everything you did to them, do it more and faster and harder with all the mean they learned from you. The witless cruelty, the smirking dismissals, the rope across your wrist, all the twisted words and lucky punches, and you wouldn't even see them coming. Oh, I watched that movie. I watched. And then there's Horror Movie Pitch 2, which is shorter. This one is even better than the last. We love it. You'll love it. It's like your typical exorcist type situation, you know, not religious, but Old Testament inspired, like rivers of blood. It goes like this. The men who climb to acclaim on our backs, digging their knees into our kidneys, dirty nails into our thighs, all of their books, films, albums, whatever they made in this life catches on fire. But before it burns, it bleeds. Stigmata on paper, staining the nice office carpeting of important people, and then turning their hands to boils when they reach out to touch the thing they once loved. The men don't burn, just their work. And they watch it all happen from comfortable chairs they didn't pay for before the locusts come. So those are those two poems.
Mhm.
So again, I love scary movies. So I was first drawn to the title of the poem, and then to dig into it, to think about it as, you know, hey, like, here's an idea, and to use the language of a film pitch to think through these ideas. For me, also, what I really dig about this poem is thinking about the different ways that horror shows up. That it is this sense of Black women being invisible, right? So they're planning, they're plotting, there's things that they're doing that, you know, other folks might not be able to see. There's nothing you can do about it. And that the people in the film have to kind of live in this perpetual state of terror because they're thinking about all the bad things they did to Black women over the years. And so I really like that idea. And also another sense of the horror might be that they leave and they go somewhere and just enjoy themselves and live life. And isn't that horror as well? Right? They're not there to have their hair touched and their names mocked, right? And then finally to end with this sense of maybe they'll do what you've done. Like maybe they'll do the same things that you've done. And maybe that's the scary part. And so I think about this kind of this terror, I think, that happens in this film, but it's also just a hilarious, you know, it's a hilarious kind of way to think about horror. So I really like this poem.
Depending, however, on your epistemic situatedness as a reader, right? I think what is so fantastic about this poem is, as a Black reader, the particular cultural sensibility and perspective and understanding, it is highly comedic, right? But if those things were actually perpetuated, if Black women actually became those invisible women, right, and horrors, I can imagine from a different racial perspective, that could be quite terrifying. I mean, and what a horror movie, right? If Black women were invisible and could do all of the things that were done unto them via racism and misogyny, right? And there's no way to prepare for that. It's like the body snatchers, right? There's no way to prepare for that. It just happens at any and every time, right? And so what I think is interesting is this duality between the comedic, right, and the terror that you're talking about, and how even that is racialized, right? Because I think you get two different poems in one.
Right. And it also made me think of science fiction, these films where people just become invisible. And certainly there's much to say about the topic of invisibility in Black literature, you know, feeling either hypervisible or feeling like no one sees you, or everyone sees you, or you don't see yourself. I think there's a lot there. But also just the line that they turn invisible. There's no long kind of origin story to it. It's just like, it just happens, right? You wake up one day they're there and the next day they're not. And so thinking about what is so in that sense, in terms of science fiction, kind of figuring out what is the science, like, is it a pill? Like, do like aliens come down? Like, how does this happen? How do they feel about being invisible? But also it kind of also leaks into like this, like post-apocalyptic, like, are people happy that the Black women are gone? Like, they're like, great, thank God, right? So also, are there the people who are like, oh my gosh, like, I really did do something to particular women, and they might be, waiting for me on my back porch, ready to, give me what's due to me. But also, what about just the swaths of people who are like, well, I didn't do anything, right? So I don't, so it also makes me think about just what type of division there might be. Some people might be glad to see the Black women go, right? But then also they have to wind up defending themselves, which is also, I think, what a tragedy in this poem. But I like it.
I love the science and technology nature of this poem in just even the pitch. The pitch itself is absurd, right? It doesn't correspond to reality, right? And so to even imagine, I mean, and of course that's what science fiction does, while alluding to truth, right? So when we go to see Alien, we walk in knowing, okay, this is not true. But yet those dynamics that give cause for aliens to do what they do, and right, the conquest of empire and colonialism and imperialism that sends us to these remote spaces, and the greed around colonizing and bringing back to Earth, right? Those are very much real dynamics that we engage in. So how science fiction moves past into the outer orbits of the imagination to make allusions to truth. And so even though this pitch is entirely and utterly ridiculous, right? How you can use this mechanism, this technology of creativity, of imagining, well, what if, right? And what does that reality hold for us in the science of our imaginations? And so one of the things that I've thought about, one of the questions that I had is, how do we discuss cinema and science fiction as a medium of racial technologies, of social justice? And what might that justice look like in the poetic sunken places of our creative imaginations, right? And of course, I'm alluding to Get Out, but what are the poetic sunken places of our creative imaginations, and what do they reveal to us as a science, if you will?
Yeah.
So I just think all of that is encoded in the poem.
Right. And I know we're going to switch over to Kyle Flemings in a second. But I'm also drawn by the raising of the goats and the chickens and the gardening, that there's another form of technology that's going on, that there's storytelling going on alongside this sort of cinematic view. So that's really interesting to me too. All right. And let's see. So now it's time to bring on Kyle. So you have Kyle's bio, or the way to intro him. I'll just gush, so I'll let you. Oh, somebody. Oh, yes, it definitely is a warning.
It's a warning?
A warning. No, in the chat. right.
Oh,
You ready to get to Kyle?
I am. I'm ready to
Okay.
transition, but I've got all of these windows up. I can't find my my window.
Well, while Dr. Wilburn does it, I just want to put in another plug for Marilyn Nelson's book, Carver, a whole book of poetry written about the life of George Washington Carver. So it's very lovely to see.
Yes.
I should write a book of poems about my life. And I learned about peanuts when I read it. So that was good too. And just his love of science and discovery was it's just a wonderful book.
Mm-hmm.
How's your thank you, Dr. Britt. How's your windows?
Scattered. You're frozen. Hold on.
Y'all hum something to yourself. Turn to your neighbors. I'll look in the chat while we.
Okay, hold on. Let me go back to.
Oh, scary movie pitch reminds me of Jefferson second guessing himself. I tremble for my country when I reflect that God is just, that his justice cannot sleep forever. Oh, Jefferson. Oh yeah, make sure that if you have questions or comments that you type them in the chat. Do that while y'all hang out.
I need help. I need to dial a friend.
Here, I'll look it up. How about this? Mr. Flemings, how about you tell us about you? Instead of them looking at us. So you tell, and then we'll go and say, yeah.
Right.
It'll be like call and response.
I like that. That works. Well,
Yeah.
First and foremost, it's a pleasure to be on here with everybody. I always love hearing Dr. Marshall and Professor Wilburn talk. It's been a pleasure just listening to you. It reminds me of when I was in class. Took both of them when I was at New Hampshire, and I just want to say thank you. Y'all have been imperative to not only my success as a student, but also my growth as an individual, as an artist, and learning Black arts. So definitely want to give y'all your flowers. So a little bit about myself. I am a creative writing teacher here at DECA. And it is a Dayton Early College Academy in Dayton, Ohio. Before that, I'm also an Air Force prior military. I recently graduated from Miami University with my master's in my Master in Fine Arts in Creative Writing and Creative Writing Pedagogy. I've taught graduate assistant courses at Miami University, mostly creative writing. I've done workshops. I do a lot of different work within diversity and inclusion, especially in the community here in Dayton, but also throughout Ohio. I've done workshops from anywhere from Ohio State to Kentucky State to all over. So writing is not only my passion, it's my craft, it's how I discovered myself, it's how I learned about myself. So that's just a little bit about me.
Great, cool. Yeah, that was what was in the materials. That was in the materials, right?
Exactly.
I second
yeah,
that.
It also said
that emotion.
You started a spoken word collective.
Yes. So
Underdog Academy.
Yes. So Underdog Academy is a collective of poets. It's 5 of us. We all teach. We all work in the community, and we're building a platform called Stories Within the Margin. And so we want to kind of uplift marginalized voices through poetry, through lectures. So we've done shows in Columbus, Ohio, and Dayton, Ohio, and Cleveland. We've done shows in Tennessee. All of the artists and poets have a book out. They've also traveled pretty extensively throughout the United States and some even internationally too. So again, poetry is not just a hobby, it's a way of life, especially for us.
And then weren't you also a featured speaker this year? And
yes, I was.
One of the poems that you're sharing with us today.
Absolutely, yeah. It was featured for the Race and Equity series in New Hampshire. Yeah, it was definitely a pleasure to be able to speak. I think it was in June. So yeah, I've done a lot of different things. Although I really say I'm kind of relatively new with this poetry thing. It's definitely something that's been on my spirit and has been moving through me. So.
Okay, you're being far too modest. I remember you writing poems when you were a student at UNH.
Yes, yeah, that's true.
I said, tell his business. So you have a poem,
Yes.
To share with us?
Yes. So the first poem is called Chalkboard Discipline. The following are open sentences. Here the sentence will be respected. Black boys do not get erasers. Here he will learn sentences before sentences. Black boys do not receive the privilege of a learning curve. Here he will learn sentencing. Black boy was sentenced, period. Here is a perfectly executed sentence. Black boy. Peace, that is Chalkboard Discipline. Did y'all want me to continue?
Just read all of them. Just read all four of them.
Okay, sounds good. Next piece. Let's go to God Body. God Body. Here we learn the value of a body, arm, leg, arm, head. Bodies ricochet off bullets, the makings of a god. Don't you count them? Corpses. See how many he can make new. How many bodies you got? Undraped ammonia. Crabs were never meant for buckets. Still our habitat a boiling pot. Crazy to think us silent, shedding our limbs before being eaten alive. Basic mathematics. Cipher too many votes, too many poll tests, too many polls tax, too many times, too many. Add the many times Black people have struggled for the right to vote for civil rights. Multiply the voter suppression, discriminatory practices, and sheer violence. Divide. Round the years to the nearest century. On what occasion, on what equation will ballots turn to bullets? Bricks of rebellion. I start off with a quote. Education is not the preparation for life. Education is life itself. John Dewey. And aren't we always learning how schools of thought are tethered to colonialism, while pride in oneself and culture is accused to be radical in theory and in practice? How easy we allow them to curse our mother tongue, making my dialect a substandard, another barrier from my birthright, with no language to offer the other, the products of segregation, whereas city limits, busing, and red lines are code for erasure, how budget cuts attached to semantics always leaves Blackness in the negative or undervalued. In this assimilation curriculum, we would call progress access. But how often have we seen inclusion mutate to gatekeeping or exceptionalism, as if diversity and equity is an open road? Instead of intersections, they will inquire about how I got here, as if my quest for my own self-determination was not enough, as if me passing their literacy tests was not enough, as if I was not enough, placing an asterisk and conditions on what you know I have overachieved for, just to shame my experience, like my presence doesn't add value, just to shame my existence, like I'm not divinely made, and how often that distorts, pixelates the reflection of a single narrative, it seems. I'm always being told that I have to wait till tomorrow. And when tomorrow comes, I have to wait for another tomorrow. I am not a pacifist. Although my tribe is meek, the meek shall and will inherit the earth. My foremothers and forefathers were forged through fire, brimstone. No longer will you render us invisible. No longer will you render us minuscule while standing in soil steeped in my ancestors' blood. On the shoulders of giants, it is their legacy that provides proper footing, a foundation, carved out a space for me to be whole, and it's built on the bricks of rebellion. Coming of age. I met violence when I was 5. I saw my sister's dad turn mother a punching bag. I cried, pulled a knife out the drawer. Violence was shocked how quickly I learned. Dream deferred. I seen it happen once. A Black boy's scream. The sound resembled white noise, hissing underneath a child's place, drowned out in church, prison, and school, deaded in the streets, courtrooms, police stations. It reminded me of a quiet place. Do you ever listen to the Black boys screaming? How to violate a Black boy's body. Conceive it. Treat the woman who pushes it out as second tier. Call the space it occupies a barren land, a ghetto. Depreciate the value. See it walking down the street. Call it dangerous. Call it. Never give it a name. Passover. My type of Black don't adhere coverage. Yellow tape graves. Service fee for darkness. Our blood smeared on doors we weren't welcome to. Reoccurring phenomenon. Call it ritual. No lifeline for Black, no lifeline for boys for number blocks. Offerings for redlining. And I have 2 more pieces, if that's okay.
You can
Yes.
Okay. Courtney, the Oz has spoken.
This is beautiful. I'm living.
Mm-hmm.
What Jazz said to Black boy. I see you, Black boy. I heard your father an offbeat. He ain't never taught you how to read music. Nobody took the time to tune you a freestyle. Learn to swing around pain till it became your instrument of choice. Distortion, a primary love language. Better be careful. Becoming a full spectrum of sound. You know, they like you. Only feeling blues. The last piece is the piece on which I wrote. It's called A New Granite State, and it's the poem for the Race and Equity series in New Hampshire. Freedom is the continuous action we all must take, and each generation must do its part to create an even more fair and more just society. John Lewis. A New Granite State. As activists, let us be reminded of what it means to make good trouble. On days we misname progress, fall victim to the trance of the mundane, when convenience and silence leave bodies rotting in routines and leads mothers towards mourning their sons and daughters and transforms indigenous lands into graveyard ghettos. How oppressive systems power the granite state, morphing in time into over-policing, into stop and frisk, into class warfare, where women's health is compromised and gender expression is outlawed, rendering diversity void. As activists, let us be reminded how pressing the need for equity and inclusion. To reimagine a greater vision of tomorrow today. To climb towards a new reality. To brave unknown territories, no longer relying on the complacency and the familiar. To acknowledge implicit biases when speaking about inclusiveness. As activists, we can't champion a cause wearing blinders while patronizing the workers at the grassroots who are empowered in collective actions, as if plural society is simply illusionary and aspirational landmark, a place in Oz you visit in a fairy tale to sightsee as a foreign spectator, instead of a garden with richness that will grow you if you immerse yourself in its roots. As activists, let us be reminded if you nurture a seed, it will feed abundantly, devoid of fictitious borders and random restraints, removing barriers and walls across languages, replacing exclusion with equity, and becoming more than a buzzword for institutions and governments, conjoining access with assets and intent with principles in which we move through conflicts and extend hands of humanity, cementing a legacy of tomorrow today. Thank you.
I love all the like clapping hands in the chat.
So any comments you wish to make about poems you selected today, Kyle, and particularly relative to the theme for this month, Race for STEM, or maybe you wish to talk about the poems in relation to the other two poems that we haven't discussed, or all four poems?
I like to talk about the basic mathematic ones, the too many poll tests, too many poll times, thinking about STEM and mathematics in particular, thinking about how many times Black people have fought for our right to exist, to just exist, or to get civil rights, and we continue to follow a line, believing that, you know, something will change. And when I wrote Basic Mathematics, was just thinking about that in mind, like how many times we've been doing this over and over and over and over and over and over again. And it's too many times. So that's why I kept on repeating the phrase too many times. piece. I'm actually, well, one, thank you for all the comments. I really appreciate that. Y'all are a very generous audience. And thinking about what Jazz said to Black Boy in relation to what y'all were talking about music, the science and music, and thinking about how impactful jazz music was to, Black people in particular. And just thinking about how I, learned to love jazz, and that poem is very, very special to me. It was actually one of the first poems I've written, since diving into the history of jazz and learning how impactful that music is to, Black culture, but also just to expression. And it's an act of resistance. It feels like. And with this particular poem, in relation to my relation to my father, a lot of my poems are centered around Black boyness, Black masculinity, and that's something that I was used to shy away from. But I think through jazz, through music, that poem helped me find myself. And then Drapetomania, in particular, thinking about the science behind the pseudoscience, rather, of Samuel Cartwright, and his belief behind thinking that there was this illness, there had to have been a mental illness for enslaved Africans to want to, run away from the plantation because they were treated so well, right? Who would want to do that? Who would want to leave a plantation? And thinking about now, in current state, how we are still stuck in this same thought process with trying to compare how we move in a system, move within systems that really are not meant for us, and we're judging or looking at each other as crabs in the bucket. And again, this habitat was not meant for us, living living through this society where you're not given basic needs. Your basic needs is not met. You have to, struggle to exist within your own skin. So, yeah, those particular poems I felt most related to the subject of STEM, and those are also some of my favorite poems. So,
do we wish to open it up, Courtney? I don't know if you have any questions, or if not, we could open it up to the audience for broader questions and answers. I see people are chomping at the bit, waiting to buy your collection of poems. I know you have at least one.
Yes, I do, for sure. And actually, these poems that I read today, they're going to be released here very shortly, and it's going to be entitled "The Boy Who Found Home." But yes, I will have that available for you, absolutely, to purchase.
Well, perhaps we can get a New Hampshire book tour.
Hey, I would love that, for sure.
You definitely can come to Exeter.
I appreciate that.
And maybe TCU.
You have a spot. Definitely.
Sorry, the Black Heritage Trail has first dibs.
We'll just see him again and again, which is good.
How many times? How many times?
Like, oh my God, I want to see him again. Great. Okay, so there's so I'm looking in the chat. Someone asked, could someone please read the Gil-Scott Heron poem? All right, who wants to read?
Jerry Ann.
Jerry Ann, you want to do it? Yes. We love it.
How about Dennis Britton?
See, now y'all know, don't sign up, don't show up to you because you might get recruited to, to read a poem.
Okay, I can take a stab at it.
Unless Mr. Flemings wants to. I don't know if he's a Gil-Scott Heron fan or.
What? Absolutely.
I mean, if you
okay.
feel, I mean, you the poet.
Yeah.
No,
So-
I'm no Gil-Scott. Gil-Scott knows a league of his own. And this
Mhm.
poem, I love this poem. It's actually a poem that I've shared with my students. So
Mhm.
So could you read it for us, please?
it won't be Gil-Scott Heron-esque, but I can do my
Just,
best.
just give us the Kyle. Just give us the Kyle Fleming remix.
I got you. Whitey on the moon. A rat done bit my sister Nell with Whitey on the moon. Her face and arms begin to swell, and Whitey's on the moon. I can't pay no doctor bill, but Whitey's on the moon. 10 years from now, I'll be paying still while Whitey's on the moon. The man just upped my rent last night because Whitey's on the moon. No hot water, no toilets, no lights, but Whitey's on the moon. I wonder why he's upping me because Whitey's on the moon. I was already paying him $50 a week with Whitey on the moon. Taxing's taking my whole damn check. Junkies making me a nervous wreck. The price of food is going up. And as if all that shit wasn't enough, a rat done bit my sister Nell with Whitey on the moon. Her face and arm began to swell, but Whitey's on the moon. Was all that money I made last year for Whitey on the moon? How come there ain't no money here? Whitey's on the moon. You know, I just about had my fill of Whitey on the moon. I think I'll send these doctor's bills, airmail special, to Whitey on the moon.
Wow. I know that, we're also shifting over to audience comments and questions. So we were told that you can either raise your hand and we can call on you, or you can unmute yourself and speak. Don't be shy. Oh, you getting more love in the chat.
So I'm going to ask a question as somebody asked, because it was a question I was going to ask myself to poet Fleming. They wanted to flesh out a little bit more about your focus on Black boys and your father. And I also, what I wrote was this whole notion of you were shying away from Black masculinity. What does that mean to be shying away from Black masculinity? What does it mean to you? And what does it mean to the environment in which we're raising our young Black men?
So when I mentioned that, it was more so a redefining of Black masculinity for myself. So one of my favorite quotes, in which I've learned actually from Miss Dr. Marshall, I remember her talking about Audre Lorde, and if I didn't define myself for myself, I would be crunched into other people's fantasies for me and ain't alive.
You better preach.
And thinking about my own version of Black masculinity, seeing how society portrays this image, they give us this image of how a Black male is supposed to look, how a Black male is supposed to dress, how a Black male is supposed to talk, and they have this kind of monolithic idea that people kind of subscribe to, and me realizing, me first acknowledging that I played into that role, right? I played into that, I fed into this, and then realizing at some point that this did not serve me, this was not benefiting me, and I felt myself kind of shrinking. I felt myself asking for help, but not having the words to kind of articulate that. I found it through poetry. I found it through reading. I found it through fellowship. So it was more so not necessarily shying away. I think I misspoke. It was more so a redefining. I'm redefining Black masculinity for myself, but also thinking about and liberating my own kind of Black masculinity. I can help hopefully show the youth, how to, especially the younger black boy generation, how to kind of redefine their own and define their own on their own terms, realizing they don't have to be pigeonholed into these stereotypes and these casts, because it doesn't serve them. And it's okay to be whoever you are, regardless.
Someone also wrote that they're struck by the power of the theme of visibility and invisibility of Black people in these poems. Do you have any thoughts on that? Do any of us have any thoughts on that? I don't know if that's specific to your poems, Kyle, or all of the poems for today, but I don't know if you have any thoughts on that as you think about your poems, the themes of invisibility and visibility.
Yeah, so in my particular poems, I know that I'm also, so we stand on, the shoulders of those who came before us, and thinking about Ralph Ellison, Invisible Man, and reading that kind of really helped me dive more into my own places and thinking about, places where I felt kind of tokenized. I didn't feel I was seen wholly. I wasn't appreciated wholly. I couldn't be myself, or I felt like I had to be performative, whether it's masculinity, whether it's Blackness, and understanding that a lot of my experience wrestling with my own Blackness, wrestling with my own identity, that I did feel invisible, and I did feel at times I had to perform. So, not being seen it's something that I feel like I don't want to speak for all Black people, because I definitely cannot, but I feel like it's something that we can identify with.
I mean, and there's, that certainly that moment in Invisible Man in the prologue where, right, the persona is talking about being like questioning, is he a phantasm of white people's imagination, right? That they won't see him, right? And sort of wanting to play the joke on them, right? By imagining, or what if I could be that invisible to play all of these tricks? I mean, and of course, the conceit of the whole novel is that he's stealing the electricity, right, underground, right? As this innocuous Black person, this invisible Black person, which is sort of bringing us back to the Gothic horror, I mean, the horror pitch, right? Horror movie pitch, right? And the invisibility. And again, I'm even thinking about in For Colored Girls, right? In that opening refrain, right? Is this a spook house? This must be a spook house, right? Black women sort of being seen as these Gothic figures, right? And so I think that theme of visibility and invisibility that's racialized definitely reoccurs throughout Black artists' attempts to chronicle our existence, our collective existence in global society.
Yeah, and I also, I'm just sitting here thinking about invisibility, and there's a way that in your poems you see Black boys, right? And you see them. And so it makes me think, when we say invisible to who, right? That there are people who are invisible to some, like I don't see them, but this person sees them. And it strikes me, I've always thought of like those two terms as being kind of opposites, but you can have it happen at the same time, right? You can have the same person, the same situation, like in your A New Granite State, where in your second stanza, you say transforms indigenous lands into graveyard ghettos. So thinking about what was once in a place and then what happens on top of it, like there's a way that you're able to see that which has been invisible, right? But there's a way that you as the poet, you see it, even though it's past. But at the same time, there's also something very hopeful and very visionary about it. And again, I always think about Octavia Butler saying, like, there's nothing new under the sun, but there are new suns. Like there's something here that you're also seeing, right? In your poem, when you think about the future, right? So you're also seeing that which we might not see. And so it's just a wonderful way to think about visibility and seeing. I see you. Oh, yes, poets make the invisible. Yeah, they
That's definitely a quote.
I love Nicole's question too. Coming from the medical field, Nicole runs into the many people pointing to science for a quote, objective truth, end quote, and on many matters. But we know the information is interrupted through biased eyes. Since this is a session on STEM, could the presenters talk about the truth in poetry and its either overlap or difference in truth in sciences or math? I have a potential answer to that, but I will defer to either of you two first.
I would actually love to know from the questionnaire, the information is interrupted through biased eyes. And so I'm wondering, Nicole Benoit, the question, are you locating the bias kind of in the eye? Are you locating it in the brain? Like, where does so when I read a question like this, I think about like, where is the source of the bias? Or what is it that biases the information, or that, as you say, interrupts?
I was presuming it's sort of like the presumption that science is all truth. And of course, science is, well, not of course, but science has typically been the domain of white scientific fathers, so that the bias is sort of kind of imputed to white male scientists or white scientists, and that how that body, that discipline is seen as objective truth that is, of course, shot through with bias. And I don't know if that's giving justice to Nicole's.
Yeah, that made me think of just thinking about the poem that I read on Drapetomania, thinking about how, again, at one point, Drapetomania was considered to be a truth, right? This idea that pseudoscience, thinking that through our own personal bias, trying to kind of leverage science as a tool for oppression, why African Americans or why Africans would want to escape implantation. So that just made me think of, in terms of the biased eyes, I thought that that information can be used, or science can still be used as a tool to, to marginalize, to oppress, and how math can be used to, rationalize certain things that are inaccurate.
Right.
And that's what I think. I'm sorry, go ahead, Courtney.
Because then I was going to say, so then if you change what you see, right, I go back to invisibility. So I think about the poem about Carver, right? And at the end of that poem, in the last stanza, Nelson writes, "From the laboratory of a slave emerged a varied balanced diet for the poor, stock foods, ink, paints, cosmetics, medicines, purpose and promise, the ancestors' dream, the peanut man, we say and laugh at him." If that might, to go back to that earlier point about like how poetry might give language, right, to, as you said, Reggie, about the kind of DEI initiatives, right? So maybe it is also about, what do we mean when we say that science is white, that it doesn't naturally just become white, right? There's active suppression and there's active keeping people out. But when you start to see the people who have been kept out, does that change the way you ultimately think about science itself?
Hopefully it does. I think for me, what I find provocative about the question is that even that, right, those same politics are brought to bear on science as truth. And somehow the work that we do as literary scholars or as poets or as artists is just, oh, everything is just free for interpretation. It's just the fancy, it's the imagination. And somehow it's not grounded in the same realities of truth that science presumably is. And yet we know science has been wrong multiple times, right? The fact that there's not yet a cure for cancer or AIDS, right, means, and I have to believe that there have been experiments going on, but they failed. So science has definitely been wrong. It's continually wrong. And so in my mind, it can be no more creative than poetry. And so I think that poetry can be truth, and it can allude to truth in the same way that a failed experiment can allude to the truth of a future cure that hasn't yet been found, right? And so I think that there are competing truths, not competing, I think there are corollary truths that have possibilities for truth, whatever that might be. And I think that poetry gives us access into that world where science can't go, maybe inhibited to go, because the discipline itself is shored up as it has to be authentic and da-da-da-da-da. You have to have your scientific method and da-da-da-da-da. I don't think poetry is bound in that way. And so therefore the access to truth is far more emancipatory and can shed light on scientific truth, whatever that might be.
But perhaps when we try to find out like what the poem means and like breaking it down, and that is us trying to find truth in it, which I think some poets have said is a violent act towards poetry, that we're holding poetry to that standard. Like you have to mean something, and we're going to keep pulling you apart, and we're going to rip you apart, and we're going to dissect you, and you're going to rip you limb from limb and analyze you and put you under a microscope until we can figure out what makes you tick, right? And that maybe there's a violence in that. So maybe this is that question is asking us to maybe use that kind of ways that we can be uncertain about poetry, and we can read it again and try and just understand, or not understand, but just enjoy it, like listen to the words, think about how it moves, and maybe that might be a more liberatory way of thinking about science and the natural world. I don't know, poetry changes everything. That's what Bell said. So
well, I guess what I like about it is I don't think that poetry's meaning is ever static, right? So I think that there are some, how would I say this? I think that there are some truths. I think that there are multiple truths to the reading of any given poem. And I think because we live in words and ideas and concepts, that the moment a poet attempts to tackle down or to write whatever, whether it's for enjoyment, sheer pleasure, or to make some commentary, once it escapes the hands of the author, right, it's fair game for everyone.
That makes me think about Frankenstein. And once you write, like you send it off out into the world and it's just out there. I don't know. Poet Flemings, I love this title. What do you think about this? You're the poet.
So I think there's multiple shades of truth. So I would agree with Professor Wilborn. I think that I think truth for me, especially when it comes to poetry, is rooted in experience. What we experience has happened to me specifically, so it must be true. I've seen it, right? However, someone in the same household can have a different experience. So I think there's, again, multiple shades of truth. I think the thing with science is that there has to be one, or it doesn't allow room for multiple. And I think that that's what I love about poetry, because again, my truth matters. I feel like I'm able to express this and have someone relate to it, and have someone, rather than someone saying, although people may say that, right? But again, it's not bound to that one truth, or this is law, So I definitely agree with that, and I think that again, how I write and how my mentors has helped me. They let me know that once again, my job is just to present. I'm observing this, I'm observing my reality. Once I express that, once the words are on the page, once I've spoken these words, now if you can resonate with something, then I know I've done my job. I know that, you're able to see some sort of truth within these words. And again, language is not static, therefore open to multiple interpretations. And that's why I love poetry.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. That's a beautiful time to segue. Speaking of beauty and poetry, to segue into Dennis Britton.
Because I am both beauty and poetry combined, so thank you.
I'm through, Muse Britton.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Dennis Britton, and I'm the outgoing president of the Black Heritage Trail of New Hampshire. And this has been an absolute joy to listen to this conversation between Dr. Marshall, Dr. Wilburn, and our featured poet for the evening, Kyle Flemings. Thank you for joining us back in New Hampshire, even if it's only through the Zoom airways. We're looking forward to that New Hampshire tour. I might even come back for it. All righty. But we also want to say thank you to Hannah. Thank you so much, Hannah, and congratulations for your beautiful and powerful poem, The Light Shines. And I do love, I feel like we just cannot meditate, or we can meditate even more. We should keep on meditating on those words from Bell Hooks that you started our session with, Courtney. It is poetry that changes everything. And I just feel like, I feel changed. The world is being changed by the work of these poets that we've been hearing this evening. So thank you, Hannah, for the way in which your poetry is changing things. And thank you, Kyle Fleming, for the way in which your poetry is changing things. We also need to thank our sponsors. Thank you to 3S Art Space for partnering with us in this evening's event. We look forward to our next evening of poetry, so please mark your calendars for January 20th, when our guest poet will be the one and the only Sonia Sanchez. And if you don't know who that is, I don't know what to say. Shame on you, I don't know where you've been, but I am so looking forward to hearing Sonia Sanchez and seeing the conversation that's going to go on that evening. And our theme for that evening will be emphatic affirmations, so stay tuned. Check out our website for the poems that will also be discussed that evening. And we are pleased to announce that Kaylee Chen will be our guest student poet that evening. We also need to thank Revision Energy for their continued partnership and their sponsorship tonight. And this being our second season of the Black Matter is Life, please tell a friend. I feel like, we had a good turnout tonight, but there should have been more, there could have been more, and they're just missing out. So everybody, you have homework, please tell a friend about this series, and everyone bring a friend to this next event. All right, so with that, again, we also have to thank you. Thank you for coming. Thank you for making time to be with us evening. Thank you for sharing your thoughts and your questions and your insight. And we also ask you to continue to check out the Black Heritage Trail of New Hampshire's webpage to learn about upcoming events. Of course, we're looking forward to our Tea Talk series, which will begin on February 3rd. But before then, of course, we're looking forward to seeing you on January 20th. Thank you, Jerry Ann Bogus, for everything you do to bring us all together. Thank you, all the volunteers. Thank you, Mimi, for getting us started. Thank you, Gina, and I'm sure I'm missing a whole lot of other folks, but thank you to everyone who has worked so hard to get this event going and getting our evening started. So everyone have a great evening, have a festive and safe and joyful holiday season, and we'll see you in 2022, if not before.